Hello folks, in this video I'm going to be doing part 4 of in-class exercise number 4. So this is the fourth part of the series of videos completing this exercise. I've already done 3 videos which cover the first 3 steps. As well, I did a little bit of number 11 and 12. In this video, I'm going to focus on number 4, making sure a new card ID is unique. So first, let's discuss why we need to do this. This is the add script, right? If somebody adds a new item to the cart, we have to check whether or not they have a card ID. If this is the first item that the user is adding, we haven't given them a card ID yet, so I'm checking. If not, is set the session card ID. So that means what? If the card ID in the session is not set, this must be the first time we're adding an item. So what we have to do is we have to make a card ID for this user. Remember, the card ID is what links all of the user's products together. So we need to get a card ID. At this point, all I'm doing is getting a random number between 0 and 100,000. Now that is a pretty big number, so there's probably a slim chance that 2 people would get the same ID. But even a slim chance is not worth the risk. If 2 separate users happen to get the same card ID, then all their products are going to get mixed up. So we have to make sure that the random number we get has not been used before. The way we're going to do that is we're going to get a random number, then we're going to verify in the database if it already exists. If it already exists, we're going to get another random number and check it again. We're going to keep doing that until we find a number that hasn't been used. So, the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy this line of code because I'm going to use it somewhere else in a few moments. Now, as we've been discussing, it's always good to use functions. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a function to help us do this. So I'm going to make a new function called getNewCardID. Now, to get a new card ID, we have to get a random number and then verify that it's not already in the database. Therefore, we have to send the database connection. We don't want to make a new connection in the function because making new connections is too costly. So, what we're going to do here is we're going to send the DB connection to the function. But notice the DB connection is only created down here at line 23. I can't send the database connection before I create it, so I have to make sure I create it first. The way I'm going to do that is I'm simply going to drag this up here. So now we have a database connection so we can send it to the function. Again, the purpose of this function is to get a unique card ID. And we're going to pass the database connection. So, the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a new file to hold the function. So I'm going to say new PHP file, and I'm going to call this db_functions. I'm planning on having a whole bunch of functions, so this is a good file to keep track of all the database functions. Now, even though I've made this file, I like to always go back and require it right away. That way, I won't forget later on. So we're going to call this DB functions. .php. So now, our job is to create this function here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the new file. and we're going to create that function. So we're going to say function get new card ID, and we're going to have to receive the DB connection. Now, as I just mentioned, we're going to have to generate a random ID, then verify it's in the database. If it is in the database, we're going to have to generate another one and so forth. So to do that, I'm going to be using a do loop. A do loop is appropriate here because with a do loop, we always do something at least once. So what we're going to do first is we're going to get a random card ID. Now, we're not done because this random number that we get could already be in use if we're unlucky. So, we have to verify that it's not in use. How do we do that? We're going to write some SQL. So, I'm going to say select SQL equals what? Select count star from cart where cart ID is equal to question mark. Right? We're going to count how many times the new card ID is in the database. We hope it's there 0 times, but we're going to find out. So, the first thing we have to do as usual is what? We have to do our prepare. So, I'm going to prepare $SQL, select SQL. After we prepare, we're going to have to do our bind param. Now in this case, we have a single question mark, so we have a single parameter. So this is going to be I, and we're going to bind what? We're going to bind the cart ID. Now, we also have to get the results. So how do we get the results? We have to do bind results. How many rows of data are we getting? Sorry, how many columns of data? Just the count. So since we only have one column of data, I just need one variable here. So I'm going to call this cart ID count. So I did the prepare, I did the bind, so now it's time to do what? It's time to do the execute. So I'm going to execute now. Whenever we do a count, we only ever get one row. That one row is how many things we counted. So since we're only doing one row, we don't need a loop. We can simply do a fetch directly. So now we have the fetch. And then finally, since we're done, we have to close the SQL statement. So we'll close that. Okay, so just to recap, we get a random number. We then check how many times it appears in the database. We prepare it. We bind the parameter. We bind the result. We execute the statement. We fetch the result. We close. Now, when do we want to keep doing this? As long as what? As long as cart ID count. Cart ID count is what? Is greater than 0. If cart ID count is greater than 0, it means that we've found the cart ID in the database already. If it's there once or twice or 10 times, it means it's not unique. So we're going to come around and do it again and do it again. When this loop ends, the cart ID must be unique because it wasn't found in the database. So the last step is I'm going to return the cart ID. So I'm going to return the card ID because now we know it's unique. So, if we go back to add, whenever we call this function, it's going to keep trying until we get a unique card ID. So let's run this to make sure we didn't make any mistakes. So first we're going to get our page. And I'm going to add 3 of these into the database. And we added it, no problem at all. I can go home. I can add a second item. I can add it. I can check out. And we have the 2 items in our cart. And everything worked out. I can't really show you that this worked, but the fact that we have no errors is a pretty good sign. So, that's the video for number 4. So, part number 4 is done. Stay tuned for part number 5. Have a great evening. See you later.